ICE in Maine continues to top the news this noontime. Dozens of state lawmakers are demanding transparency and accountability from the Department of Homeland Security. 81 Democrats and 2 independents signed onto a letter to DHS Secretary Markwayne Mullin calling for the department to cooperate fully with a state investigation into the shooting of Johan Guerrero. He was killed by an ICE agent in Biddeford this month. He was reportedly not a target of ICE's investigation. The lawmakers are calling recent actions from ICE agents across the country and in Maine reckless. Meanwhile, town councilors in Scarborough are calling on Maine's congressional delegation now to take steps to close or move the ICE facility there. Councilors voted unanimously last night to pass the proclamation at their meeting. Several people were gathered outside that meeting to protest ICE. During the public comment portion of that meeting, most residents also spoke against ICE's efforts. Some were in favor of them. Before voting, councilors shared what they hope to accomplish with this proclamation.
Tonight is just the start of a difficult conversation we need to have openly as a community, a conversation that I'm personally willing to continue to see what actions this council may be willing to take. If we want change that lasts, it has to be lawful, defensible, and able to withstand legal challenge.
You know, maybe they are illegal. Maybe they've done something wrong. Maybe they're resisting arrest. Or, you know, but you can't kill them for that.
The resolution also asked the delegation to advocate for more transparency regarding federal immigration enforcement and calls to hold federal agents in Maine to certain standards. Now, just yesterday, Congresswoman Shelley Pingree wrote a letter to the Scarborough Town Council in favor of that proclamation they were voting on last night. In letter, she called the facility a, quote, symbol of fear. She told town leaders she is exploring her options to address ICE activity in Scarborough. She says the town has every right to question if hosting that facility serves the community's best interests. Closer look for you now. Maine Democrats chose Troy Jackson to face Republican Senator Susan Collins this November. But now some are questioning his eligibility because he already ran for governor in the June primary. Representative James White, a Republican, sent a letter to the Secretary of State asking her to investigate. Our Christian Harsa has a closer look.
But what if Troy Jackson, newly minted as the nominee, can't run?
Law says that you can only run for one of these positions in a cycle. And he's already lost a race, just like some other folks that ran for governor. So he's not an eligible candidate.
Maine law section 331 says someone cannot file for more than one federal, state, or county office at any election.
It is what it is. He's running for another office after he's already lost an election.
I think it's a creative argument, but I think probably a losing one.
Maine law professor Dimitri Baum points towards the word file.
And here Jackson only filed for one office.
Instead, the Democratic Party chose Jackson for the U.S. Senate. Republican Representative James White sees it differently.
So he threw his hat into the ring. He wasn't chosen. He was chosen after he threw his hat into the ring after he lost the governor's race.
White says the problem isn't just how, he says it's also when.
Law says that you can only run for one of these positions in a cycle.
The question is the primary the same election as the general election for the Senate? I think that may be a closer call. I think probably not, but you can make an argument there.
White also argues that this law serves a purpose, preventing candidates from trying again and again.
We have sore loser laws in place for a reason.
The statute here is not really a sore loser statute. It's kind of a dual filer hedger statute.
To prevent someone from hedging their bets by running for the Blaine House, U.S. Senate, and State House all at the same time.
Whereas a sore loser statute is, I ran as a Democratic candidate in the primary, I lost, okay, fine. I'll just drop out of the party and run as an independent.
The Jackson campaign isn't giving the challenge much weight. Republicans are so worried that Susan Collins is about to lose, they're resorting to cheap tricks. Troy Jackson will harness the grassroots energy in Maine and defeat Susan Collins, wrote a campaign advisor. White's letter, sent on Friday to Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, has gone unanswered. So has New Center Maine's request for comment on Tuesday. On Monday, Bellows did release a list of candidates withdrawn or replaced. Jackson is at the top of the list.
I think somebody could bring the challenge in court and say this person is not eligible. But like I said, I think it's unlikely that she would change her mind. And I think it's highly unlikely that the court would reverse the decision anyway.
That was Christian Harsa reporting for us. A federal appeals court is now considering whether a Maine law limiting donations to political action committees is constitutional. The court heard arguments on question 1 yesterday. That law was approved by Maine voters back in 2024. It would limit contributions to political action committees or super PACs that spend money on specifically advocating for one candidate or the defeat of the other in elections. Last year, the measure was struck down by a U.S. district court for violating the First Amendment. The state filed an appeal soon after. And yesterday, attorneys for the state argued that the majority of super PACs are still unfairly aligned with specific candidates, even if they're not communicating directly. Opponents, however, argue the way the PACs operate still does not compromise election integrity or violate the law.
There is disclosure of donations to super PAC expenditures, so that's out there. And there is no ability to coordinate whatsoever.
In an interview following the oral arguments, one of the defendant's attorneys shared an example of why they believe unlimited donations can have an unfair influence.
The scenario that we're worried about is like the scenario that happened in New Jersey with Senator Menendez. Menendez was approached by a rich guy. The rich guy said, if you'll do me some favors, I will give a whole bunch of money to your super PAC. The super PAC was completely independent. It didn't do anything wrong.
Both sides say Supreme Court precedent supports their position. The challengers argue the 2010 case, Citizens United versus FEC, protects unlimited donations to super PACs, while supporters of Maine's law say that ruling was about independent spending, not contributions. They say states should be able to limit donations to prevent the appearance of corruption.